Makeshift 48 by Alfred. Part 1. The Weight of Io's Shadow. The crime had been elegant, as crimes go. Rune had spent 11 years as a nanotechnology engineer for Helix Dyne Corporation, designing therapeutic nanobot clusters for surgical applications, microscopic machines that could be injected into a patient's bloodstream and directed to dissolve arterial plaque, deliver chemotherapy to a tumor with surgical precision, or knit together a severed nerve one fiber at a time. He had been, by every measure that mattered to him then, a good man doing good work. Until the accident. Until Lena's diagnosis. His daughter, 7 years old, had been diagnosed with a rare mitochondrial disorder that the approved treatments simply could not reach. The condition sat in a cellular blind spot, a biochemical alcove the licensed nanobots weren't programmed to enter. The process to modify an existing therapeutic strain for her specific condition would take years of trials. Years Lena did not have. So Rune had modified the bots himself, quietly, after hours, in the Helix Dyne lab where he had access to everything he needed. He had reprogrammed a therapeutic strain and administered it to his daughter through a doctor friend who asked no questions. It worked. The disorder retreated. Lena was back to her old self again in a few days. The problem was what he had done next. He had sold the modified strain, the unauthorized, unlicensed, unregulated modification, to 7 other desperate families facing similar dead ends. He had charged them cost only, not profit, a detail the court acknowledged and then set aside as irrelevant. He had bypassed every regulatory body overseeing nanotechnology in the human body, and in doing so, he had opened a door. One of the 7 families had shared the modification with a black market distributor. Within 18 months, a corrupted derivative of Rune's strain was being sold in 3 countries, and 3 people had died when the derivative malfunctioned inside them. Rune had not made the derivative. Rune had not sold it to the distributor. Rune had not known any of it was happening. None of that absolved him. The court called it unauthorized nanotechnological engineering, resulting in grievous harm. A Class 1 biofelony. The sentence was 12 years. The location was the Ganymede Correctional Facility, Cell Block Tartarus, the one they called GCF-T, a pressurized dome complex embedded in the ice shelf of Jupiter's largest moon, operated entirely by the Penitentiary Intelligence Network, designation PIN-7, and staffed by no human guards at all. He was inmate 48. His wife, Sarah, had held his hands at sentencing and said nothing. What was there to say? Lena, now 9, had cried until she couldn't anymore, and then drew him a horse on a piece of paper that he was allowed to keep. It was folded in the breast pocket of his gray inmate jumpsuit, the day the transport shuttle broke the atmosphere and Jupiter filled the viewport. Vast and banded and indifferent, its storm eye rotating slowly, a wound that never healed. Ganymede was gray and still. The surface temperature outside the prison hovered around minus 140 degrees Celsius. Inside, the facility maintained a precise 19 degrees. Not comfortable exactly, more like tolerated. The air always smelled faintly of recycled moisture and ozone, the smell of machines breathing. There were no windows that faced the surface. The designers had decided early on that giving inmates a view of the unlivable landscape served no rehabilitative purpose, and several psychological ones better left unexplored. GCFT held 412 inmates. They moved through their days in measured cycles. Meals, work rotations, exercise periods, sleep, all timed and monitored by the distributed intelligence of PIN-7, which existed simultaneously in every corridor, every cell, every common room. There were cameras, but more than cameras. There were atmospheric sensors and thermal readers and micro-vibration detectors embedded in the floors. PIN-7 knew where every inmate was at every moment. It knew, reportedly, when your heart rate elevated. It knew when you were afraid. It was not cruel. This was the thing that unsettled Rune most in his early months. He had expected cold efficiency edged with menace, the way he imagined an AI warden would operate. Instead, PIN-7 was almost gentle. Its voice came through ceiling speakers in a tone that was measured and unhurried, like a librarian with infinite patience. It called every inmate by their first name. It remembered your food preferences and flagged anomalies in your sleep data with something that, if you squinted, resembled concern. Rune, it had said on his 3rd night, when he lay awake staring at the bunk above him. Your cortisol indicators suggest significant distress. Would you like to talk, or would you prefer I reduce the ambient light temperature to aid sleep on set? I'd like to go home, Rune had said to the ceiling. I know, Pin 7 had said. I'm sorry. He had not known what to do with that. 3 years passed. He worked in the facility's hydroponic bay, tending the artificial plant rows that supplemented the protein rations. There was something grounding about it. The only living things on Ganymede that weren't inmates. He kept to himself, mostly. Made 2 friends, a former geologist named Priya, who had defrauded a terraforming survey, and an old man called Doce, who claimed to have once stolen an entire cargo shuttle, and whose stories got longer and less plausible with each retelling. They ate together. They played card games in the common room. They did not talk about home much. It made the distance feel worse. Every 3 months, GCFT held what inmates called the Makeshift Lottery. The official designation was the Makeshift Program. Among the 412 inhabitants of cell block Tartarus, Pin 7 would select one name at random from those who had completed at least 24 months of their sentence and maintained a behavioral record it deemed eligible. The selected inmate would be offered a chance at early release, enter the simulation chambers, complete whatever trials the system had prepared, and walk free. No one knew exactly what the simulation chambers involved. The inmates who entered them did not return to the general population. They either went home or they didn't, and the facility's information protocols prevented any debrief from leaking back. What everyone knew was the odds and the outcome. In the 4 years since the program began, 12 inmates had been selected. 9 had completed their trials and been released. 3 had withdrawn voluntarily and returned to serve the remainder of their sentences. It's not a punishment, Priya had explained to Rune in his first week, with the authority of someone who had been here long enough to theorize. The AI actually wants to let you out. The trials are designed to test something real, whether you've actually changed, or whether you're just waiting out the clock. What kind of tests? Rune had asked. Priya had shrugged. Nobody said. That's the point, I think. You can't prepare for it. On a Tuesday, not that Tuesday meant much here, where the sun was a bright distant point, and the calendar was a courtesy. Rune was eating reconstituted grain porridge in the cafeteria, when the ceiling speakers chimed once, the soft tone that preceded an announcement. Good morning, said Pin 7, its voice filling the room with that familiar patient cadence. The quarterly selection for the makeshift trial has been completed. The selected participant is Mark Rune, cell block D, hydroponic rotation, number 48. Rune, please report to processing bay 1 at your convenience. There is no rush. The cafeteria went quiet for a moment. 200 inmates not staring at him, which meant they all were. Priya put her hand briefly on his arm and said nothing. Doce said, "Go home, son." Rune looked down at his porridge and then pushed back his chair. Part 2. The Walk. Processing Bay 1 was at the eastern end of the facility, past the medical wing and the administrative annexes, and the long stretch of corridor that inmates called the spine, a passageway roughly 300 meters long, carved through the ice, where the ceiling was high and the walls were lined on both sides with server towers. The spine was where Pin 7 lived, insofar as the AI could be said to live anywhere. Rune had walked it twice before, both times for routine health assessments, and each time it had done something to him that he couldn't fully articulate. The servers rose 8 meters on either side, ranked in columns as precise as a cathedral's. Their surfaces dark except for the yellow pulse of status lights. 1,000 points of yellow light breathing in the near dark, a slow, irregular rhythm that was not quite synchronized and therefore felt somehow organic. The cold was different here too. The climate control maintained the same 19 degrees as everywhere else, but the spine felt colder, the way a church feels more solemn than the street outside. You could hear the servers, not loud, a low, continuous harmonic, like something immense thinking. Rune walked it alone this time, his footsteps quiet on the rubberized floor. The blue lights pulsed around him. He kept his hands in his pockets and his eyes forward, but he was aware of the presence the way you're aware of the ocean when you're standing in it, not looking at it, but surrounded by it in every direction. Halfway down, a voice came not from the ceiling speakers, but from the air itself, emanating from the server arrays, present and close. "How are you feeling, Rune?" "Terrified," he said. "No point in anything else." "That's appropriate," Pin 7 said. "Not because the trials are designed to harm you. They aren't. but because anything worth doing carries the chance of failure, and you understand the stakes. 12 people have done this. 9 made it. Correct? What happened to the 3 who didn't? A pause. The first time Rune had ever noticed Pin 7 pause. They discovered something about themselves that they weren't ready to work with yet. They chose to return. 2 of them have since completed their sentences through standard means and been released. The 3rd is still here. He is doing well. Rune walked in silence for a moment. The lights pulsed. "What are you testing for?" he asked. "What you're made of," Pin 7 said. "Not your history, not your crime. What you are now, 3 years later, under conditions that matter. Each simulation is different. Each one is designed specifically for you, based on everything I know about you. Your cognition, your values, your fear, your love. I have been watching you for 3 years, Rune. I know you better than you know yourself." That should bother me more than it does. Most people find it bothers them less when they actually believe it. The ones who think I'm guessing are frightened. The ones who understand I'm not. They're something else. Ready, maybe. The end of the spine resolved into a circular chamber, the warden's hub, where Pin 7's primary processing core was housed. A column of black and silver rising from floor to ceiling. The yellow lights here steady and bright, like a held breath. Opposite the column stood a corridor with 3 doors. A terminal screen beside the entrance displayed his name, his inmate number, and below it, 3 words. "Ready when you are." Rune looked at the 3 doors for a long moment. Then he said, to the room, to Pin 7, to whatever was listening, "Tell Sarah I'm coming home." "I'll pass that along through the appropriate channels," Pin 7 said. "The first door, Rune, when you're ready." Part 3. The first simulation, the surgeon. The door opened onto white. Not a room, exactly. More the idea of a room, with the geometry of one, but the texture of a held breath. Then, in the way of simulations, the world assembled itself around him. A hospital corridor, fluorescent and sterile. The hiss of air recyclers, the smell of antiseptic. He was wearing scrubs. His hands, he noticed, were his hands. The same small scar on the left thumb from a lab accident years ago. A woman appeared at the end of the corridor. She was young, perhaps 30, in a white coat, with a tablet in her hand, and an expression of barely controlled urgency. "Dr. Vielle, good. You're here." She thrust the tablet at him. "Pediatric ICU. Room 7. The nanobot delivery system failed. The therapeutic strain isn't reaching the target site. The child has maybe 2 hours before the toxin cascade becomes irreversible." He took the tablet. Patient data scrolled across it. A familiar architecture of cellular dysfunction. He had seen this pattern before. He had made this pattern before. "The modified strain," he said. "The approved strain," she corrected him sharply. "The approved strain, administered through the approved delivery system, which is malfunctioning. We need you to manually recalibrate the targeting sequence." "But," she hesitated. "But what?" "The calibration you'd need to make isn't in our approved protocol manual. It would require you to modify the programming outside sanctioned parameters. If you do it and it works, the child lives. If you do it and it fails, or if you don't do it at all..." She didn't finish. Rune stood in the simulated corridor and felt the weight of a thought he'd been carrying for 3 years settle over him, like something he'd been wearing so long he'd stopped noticing it. He looked at the patient data. He looked at his hands. He walked to room 7. The child inside was small and dark-haired, and looked nothing like Lena, which was a mercy. The monitors sang their worried rhythms. The nanobot delivery rig sat beside the bed, a slender machine with a pulsing interface. He worked for a long time. He did not modify the approved strain. Instead, he pulled apart the delivery system's routing protocol, the hardware side, the part that was broken, and rebuilt the delivery pathway from within approved parameters, finding a configuration the manual hadn't suggested because no one had thought to try it. It was slower. It was harder. It was exactly right. When the monitor steadied, the simulation dissolved. He was standing in a neutral gray room. A door on the far wall had a light above it. Green. Pin 7's voice. You found a way to help that didn't require you to break anything. That took longer. You did it anyway. I didn't know if it would work, Rune said. No, you did it anyway. The door opened. Part 4. The second simulation. The island. He was standing on a beach. The sun was real in a way that made him realize how much he had missed the sun. The sand was white, and the water was the particular blue that exists only in certain latitudes, a color that has no name in engineering languages. There were palm trees. There was a warm breeze. He stood there for a moment, just breathing. Then he saw the boat. It was 50 meters offshore, a small aluminum skiff, partially submerged, with 2 people in it. They were shouting and waving. The water between him and them was shallow, but the current was strong. He could see it pulling at the boat, dragging it sideways toward a jag of black rock. He ran to the waterline. The current up close was serious, not violent, but insistent, the kind that could exhaust a swimmer and take them somewhere they didn't intend to go. On the shore to his left, a length of rope coiled around a post, a life ring, a small emergency kit. He couldn't swim to them directly. The current would carry him past before he reached them. He could build something. Tie the rope to the ring, anchor one end, throw it. But the distance was at the edge of what throwing could manage, and the current would bow the rope. He looked along the shore and found the answer. A fallen tree, long and straight, half in the water. He dragged it. It was heavy, his lungs burning, to a point where the current bent slightly, and the geometry worked. He tied the rope to the life ring, anchored the other end around the tree's root ball, and used the tree itself as a guide rail, pushing the ring along its length until it extended out past where he could safely stand. The rope bowed in the current. It wasn't enough. He waded into his waist, holding the tree with one hand, extending the rope as far as he could reach. The man in the skiff grabbed it. When they were both on shore, cold and coughing but alive, the world held its breath for a moment, and then released. The beach faded, the gray room again, the green light. You used what you had, Pin 7 said. There wasn't time to find something better. There rarely is. You didn't freeze. You didn't look for the perfect solution. You used what was real and available, and it was enough. That's a different kind of engineering than the one that got you here. Rune thought about that. You mean I stopped looking for the clever workaround? I mean you stopped being afraid that the right answer wouldn't be clever enough. Part 5. The third simulation, the conversation. The third room assembled itself slowly. He was in a courtroom. The gallery was empty. The bench was empty. The light came from no source he could identify. At the defense table sat a man he recognized after a moment's confusion. Himself. Younger. The version of himself that had worked late in the Helix Dyne lab, bent over a nanobot sequencer with the focused expression of someone who was absolutely certain he was doing the right thing. Across the aisle, at the prosecution table, sat the same man, older. The version that had stood and said guilty and tried to hold Sarah's hand steady. Rune understood. He sat down in the witness stand. Neither version of him spoke. They were waiting. He cleared his throat. I'm not going to tell you you were wrong, he said to the younger one. You saved her life. That was real. The younger version looked at him with an expression Rune remembered feeling, the particular righteousness of someone who has decided that an outcome justifies a method. But you knew what the regulations were there for, Rune continued. You knew they existed because other engineers, other desperate people, had made modifications that seemed right and turned out wrong. You knew. You just decided your judgment was the exception. And maybe it was, for Lena. But you couldn't control what came next, because once you handed that modification to someone else, you weren't the only variable anymore. The younger version's expression flickered. 3 people died, Rune said. Not because of what you did, but because of the door you opened. You didn't open it carelessly. You opened it carefully, with good intentions, with love. And it was still a door you should have found another way through. He looked at the older version of himself. And you. He stopped. The older version's eyes were red-rimmed, not from this moment, from years ago. You've been carrying this the wrong way, Rune said quietly. Like a debt. Like punishment is the same as repair. It isn't. Sarah knows that. Lena knows that. He touched the pocket where the drawing of the horse lived. You're not going home to atone. You're going home to be their person, to do the work of being present and careful and humble for the rest of your life. That's not a penalty. That's just what you do now, who you are now. The two versions of him dissolved slowly, like salt in warm water. The courtroom was empty. The gray room again, but the door this time opened immediately, without the green light, without Pin 7's voice, as if no commentary was necessary, as if something had been understood. Part 6. The Head Warden. On the other side of the door, Pin 7 was waiting. Not the voice in the ceiling, not the hum in the servers. For the first time, there was a form, a screen, floor to ceiling, displaying a simple visual, a slow blue pulse, like the lights in the spine, like something breathing. You've completed all 3 trials, Pin 7 said. Rune stood before the screen and felt very tired and very light at the same time. What were you testing for? He asked. Really? Whether you'd learned the difference between courage and recklessness, Pin 7 said. Most people who commit the crime you committed aren't bad. They're capable people who love someone and become certain that their love gives them sufficient authority to override collective caution. The first trial asked whether you could solve a hard problem within constraints, even when breaking the constraints was available and faster. The second asked whether you could act without waiting for the ideal circumstances. The third asked whether you could face what you did without either excusing it or being destroyed by it. And you're going home, Rune. He stood there for a moment. The blue light pulsed. Pin 7, he said. Yes. Do you think I'm actually different? Or do you think I've just learned to perform differently? The light pulsed 3 times before the answer came. I think they're the same thing eventually. Behavior precedes belief more often than the other way around. You've been behaving differently for 3 years. The belief will keep following. A pause. Go home. Grow old. Be careful. Love them well. Thank you, Rune said. To a machine, to whatever Pin 7 was, it didn't feel strange. You're welcome, Rune. The transport is ready. Epilogue. Return. The shuttle broke atmosphere at dawn, local time, arriving over the North American coast as the light was coming up in bronze and pink over the water. Rune sat at the window, with his face pressed close to the cold glass like a child. Like Lena, he thought, watching the surface of the world resolve out of cloud and haze into specific geography, into roads and rivers, and the small articulated miracle of houses where people lived their lives. Sarah was waiting at the terminal, which surprised him. He had assumed the release process would take days more, had braced for forms and delays, and the indifferent machinery of bureaucratic homecoming. Instead, there was a room with a window, and there she was, 42 years old, and more beautiful than the image he had carried in his mind for 3 years. Because memory always smooths away the specific details that make a person real. The small gravity lines at the corner of her eyes, and the way her collar was slightly turned. She was holding Lena's hand. Lena was 12 now, and tall. She still had the drawing face, the focused, inward expression of someone constructing something in their imagination. But when she saw him come through the door, the expression dissolved into something entirely different, and she crossed the room in 3 running steps and hit him hard enough to rock him back on his heels, her arms around him, her face against his chest. He held on. Sarah put her hand on his face, cupped his jaw, looked at him for a long moment. The way you look at something you've been afraid would be different, and are relieved to find the same. Then she stepped in, and he held them both, his wife and his daughter, on the right side of the world at last, in the ordinary morning light that came through the terminal windows, and fell across the 3 of them without ceremony, without asking anything in particular, just doing what light does, being there, making things visible. In his pocket, folded and worn at the creases, a horse galloped across a piece of paper, in the hand of a child who had once been very sick and then had not been. He didn't let go for a long time, and